Hi, I'm Carmen, DeVito, garden designer here in New York City. Today we're going to talk about summer watering, pests, and some edible weeds that you can find in your summer garden. Let's start with correct watering practices. So sometimes you find a plant that's in wilt. This one isn't, but we're going to pretend that it is. And you want to revive it. So one of the things that you can do is to plunge it into deep water to try to revive it. And here I'll show you how to do it. You take any container that holds water, you take the whole plant, and you completely submerge it. And you can see the bubbles here. And when the bubbles stop, the plant has absorbed as much water as it possibly can, and then you pull it out. Now it's not going to revive immediately, you let it drain, but then you can water it by hand normally after it's been resuscitated. Put it in the shade, and then we can, hopefully it'll come back to life. Another good practice is double watering, and that's especially important for containers. Containers dry out a lot more in the summer, so you'll find that your plants need sometimes water twice a day. But when I'm talking about double watering, I'm talking about watering it once, and you always want to use a water breaker or some kind of watering can with these very small holes. You water it once, thoroughly and slowly. That's really important. Let it completely drain, and then water it again. Sometimes the first watering, when a container is really dry, the water just goes all the way through. And the second watering is the one that's actually absorbed. Now we're going to talk about pests. We're going to go inside because there's a lot of noisy construction out here. So follow me.
Hi, so we had to move inside because it was really noisy, which is just as well because it's 100 degrees out. And we're going to talk about insects now. There's so many different insects pests. In my garden, I've had grasshoppers, Japanese beetles, cicadas, aphids, whitefly, thrips, just about everything. So I'm going to talk about the more common ones that you might find. And if the construction stops for a bit, we might go outside. If not, we'll work from here. So let's talk about aphids first. Aphids are one of the most ubiquitous. You've probably seen them. And this is what they look like. They're little pear-shaped bodies. These happen to be green, but they come in a lot of different colors: red, yellow, brown, black. I find them on the tips of my roses, the young growth, and they are basically sap-sucking insects, and they can do a lot of damage. So the way that I deal with them is I usually just blast them with the hose, and then I spray them. And I'm going to talk about organic sprays in just a minute. So when you are on your roses or young plants or the new growth, that's where you're going to find most likely the aphids. And they're pretty easy to manage, even though their populations can get quite large. You can also release ladybugs. Ladybugs love to eat aphids, and that will knock down the population a little bit. But when the aphids are gone, the ladybugs go away. So that isn't really like a permanent solution, in my opinion. Okay, let's talk about leaf miners, because they're some of the most interesting insects that I find in the garden. Here you can see their damage. I call it insect graffiti. This is on my columbine, and the larva stage of different kinds of species tunnel in between the layers of the leaves and do this kind of patterning. And I find it kind of actually weirdly beautiful. You can't spray, as I said, because you can't get to the larva because it's covered by the actual leaf membrane. So what I usually do is I remove the infected parts, because the kind of sprays that you would have to use to kill these is super toxic to bees and other pollinators. So I don't like to do that. And one of the things that you can do is you can use plants that attract these leaf miners. So the columbine attracts the leaf miners, and it kind of keeps them away from other plants that are sort of more important to me, whose leaves I might care how damaged they are, like spinach, and lettuces and other things like that. So these columbines for me are sort of trap plants for the insects. And let me show you what the insects look like, even though you'll probably never see them, larvae I should say. of the leaf miners. Here they are. Here. This is what the leaf miner looks like. Here's some other damage on some spinach or chard. So the columbine does a really good job. And the interesting part is that the columbine isn't really affected. It flowered beautifully. Yeah, the foliage got hideous by the end of the summer, but then I eventually just cut it down and it's no big deal. And it seemed to keep these guys away from my greens that I wanted to eat, and I wanted them to look good. Okay, next we have whitefly. Okay, and I've had that in my garden too. They're very, very small. This is greatly enlarged, and this is what their damage looks like. They kind of take the chlorophyll out of the leaf, and you'll see these like splotchy things. These, you can tell that you have them. Usually, if you look on the underside of the leaf, they're very, very tiny, a little bit larger than the head of a pin. But if you hit the foliage with your hand, they'll fly out, and then you'll see them, and you'll know that you have them. I use the same kind of thing. I try to spray down to kind of disperse them. I spray with a hose, a strong jet of a hose, and then I put a spray that I'm going to share with you. So that's an example of that. And next we have thrips. Thrips are similar to aphids in that same family. Here you can see them. They're also greatly enlarged, and they do similar kinds of damage, discoloring the leaf. Here, I'm going to show you on my verbena plant, on the foliage, all this discoloration, and it's not really killing the plant, but it's making it kind of ugly. So these I do spray. They're kind of soft-bodied. And now I'm going to show you some damage by an insect that's really not doing any real damage, and I don't treat it. These perfectly sort of half-circle bites are done by the leafcutter bee. And they usually attack my roses every year, and it's not pretty, but the roses aren't in flower anyway, so I do not want to do anything to destroy bees. So they take these leaf pieces and then they use them to line their cells or their nests. So it's really actually kind of fun to watch them work, and I know that they're not really doing any kind of damage. Okay, so now I'm going to show you another gardening hack. When it's high summer, or any time that you're dealing with pests and disease, and you're using pruning as a technique to clean up, damaged foliage or any part that's infested, you want to sterilize your tools in between. And there's a few ways you can do it. My way is to use a lighter. Take the lighter and I burn it like this. If there's any disease or insect parts that could be transferred from one plant to another, that takes care of it. So when I'm working on any plant that's diseased or covered in pests, I sterilize my pruners in between. You can also use alcohol wipes or bleach, but those are in high demand right now, so probably your best bet is flame. So let's talk about the kind of insect controls that I use. The one that I use the most is neem oil. Neem oil comes from a tree, the neem tree from India. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is not only an insecticide, it's also an insect repellent, and also a fungicide, so it helps prevent and treat fungal diseases. Let me show you what the tree looks like. It's very, very interesting. Here it is. It's a pretty large tree. Here's its flowers, and here's the nuts where they get the oil from. And it really is amazing. It works on just about anything, and it's organic. And people in India have been using it for centuries. So I buy the concentrate and I mix it in a sprayer. And when you're using insecticides, you want to mix up just what you need for that application or for a couple of days. You don't want to keep it in the container too long. It degrades and can damage the container if it stays too long in the spray container. So just mix up what you need and use it for that application. So I highly recommend neem oil. Another thing that I use for disease control in my garden is a biofungicide and bactericide. It uses a type of bacillus, and it helps with things like powdery mildew or different kinds of fungal diseases. But the thing about fungicides, especially organic ones, the non-organic ones are very, very toxic, so I don't use them. But the organic ones, you have to preventively spray for it to really be effective. So you kind of have to spray things that you know get funguses and mildews before it happens. If you know that it happens every year, do it before you see it, because after you see it on the foliage, it's usually kind of too late. Another pest that some of you might have, especially if you have shade gardens, is slugs and snails. And I definitely have some of that in my garden, especially in the front and in the kind of shaded areas. So slugs and snails can do a great deal of damage. I sometimes try to trap them with stale beer in a can, but if I don't have the room, or if that isn't working as effectively as I'd like, then I use the Sluggo and I sprinkle it around and it kills them. And you know, they especially go after things like strawberries and lettuces and all the leafy greens, which I really, you know, care about how the foliage looks like. So use Sluggo preventively, and you have to keep reapplying it because after the rain, it kind of gets washed away. Now we're going to talk about my favorite edible weed. I grew up eating this plant, and I really didn't appreciate it at the time, but now I really love it. It's called Purslane, and here you can see it's in a container. I planted something else in this container and Purslane came out. The thing that I planted didn't come up. Purslane grows in my garden every year, both in the ground and all along the cracks in the paving, and it is really, really delicious. Its botanical name is Portulaca aleraceae. Another name for it is pigweed or fatweed. And as it grows, the stems get red, and it has these like fleshy leaves. This is some that I cut. It doesn't keep well, so you want to cut it and then use it right away. I use the leaves and the young stems, and it is so delicious and super nutritious. I want to share with you just how nutritious this plant is, because I did some research. It has amazing properties, and it's really, really good for you. Look at its nutrients in 100 gram, or about 3 ounce portion, which is maybe what you would put in a salad. Vitamin A, C, magnesium, manganese, potassium, iron, calcium, a bunch of the vitamin B's. It also is high in omega-3 fatty acids and different kinds of antioxidants. So nowadays, I think you can get it in the farmer's market, but once you start gardening, it'll probably pop up on its own. You just want to make sure that it truly is purslane. So you want to make sure that the liquid that comes out of it when you cut it is clear. So look for these round, fleshy leaves. They're small and oval. They get big as they get more mature. And you can just keep on cutting it and keep on using it. The way that I use it is in salads. You can cook it, but it gets kind of gelatinous texture like okra. So I use it only raw, and I use it in salads, potato salads, as well as garden salads. And I'm going to share some of my recipes later in this week for that. Thanks for watching my gardening video. You can follow me at DeVito. The next 2 videos in August are going to be in the field. We're going to visit some amazing farms and gardens in the area that are doing wonderful work with agriculture and horticulture. Stay safe and keep growing.